Ian, spend a minute or two on Russia and Ukraine, if you will. Obviously, the war keeps going, although Russia seems to have backed off for the moment on some of the missile strikes. What are you expecting over the course of the winter? What do we know about depletion of armaments on either the side of Russia or, for that matter, the West?
I'm not sure they backed off. I mean, there were a lot of drone strikes against Kiev over the course of the last 12 hours. It just so happened that the Ukrainians were able to knock them down. Now, the biggest story in the last 24 hours has been the Americans now talking about implementing the Patriot missile defense system on the ground for Ukraine. It's one of the most advanced defense systems that exists in the world. The Israelis, of course, have that through Iron Dome. Ukraine is way too big to defend everything, but you could defend the capital that way. You could defend key military installations that way, and the Russians wouldn't be able to get through. It's a very expensive program. We're talking about billions of dollars, maybe even more than 10 billion, depending on how big they decide to go. But it will allow the Ukrainians to defend themselves. And Russia's warfighting capabilities really don't include a new major offensive at a minimum until spring. So this is humiliation and degradation of the Russian political system and of the Russian economy. And at some point, you have to think that Putin's going to want to whack back.
You mentioned, Ian, the drone strikes against Kyiv, and then before that, Odessa, as I recall, which were more effective over the weekend. A lot of the drone activity is coming out of Iran, as I understand it. We are hearing that there is a growing closeness in defense and strategic relationships between Russia and Iran. How close are they getting?
Well, the good news is that there's not a growing closeness between Russia and China. The Chinese have provided no military support for Russia since this war began. The Americans read the riot act to the Chinese government. The Chinese weren't happy, but they're not trying to be the best friends to Russia globally. The Iranians are. And it goes both ways. The Russians are helping the Iranians with repression at home, and the Iranians are helping the Russians with repression abroad, with a lot of defense, a lot of drone sales, and increasingly expected to see ballistic missile sales. And that is allowing the Russians to continue the war against Ukrainian citizens, to pursue war crimes against Ukraine. This is going to lead to tougher sanctions against Iran. It means the likelihood of a nuclear deal with the Iranians is functionally zero. And it means that the Iranian government's going to face a lot more pressure going forward. So Iran and Russia are increasingly in the same box. And in the same way that if you're in the Middle East, if you're a Gulf state, if you're the Saudis, or if you're Israel, you consider Iran to be your top security threat in the region. Nothing else is close. Increasingly, NATO is going to feel that way about Russia. And I don't see any way out of either of these stories.